Welcome to this episode of Creative Mastermind. Today we have an interview with my personal teacher and a man who is responsible for training a lot of artists, Frank Mulvey. Frank Mulvey, not only he's an exceptional artist, he's a wonderful teacher, and I'm very excited to share with you guys some of the achievements that he had in his career as a professional artist. And also, I would like to get to know a little more about his approach to work, his philosophy. So without further ado, let's get started with the first question. Frank, how did you even decide to become an artist?
I don't think I ever made that decision. I think that given that I always enjoyed working with my hands, creating things, problem solving, and rigging up solutions, I was always the way I am. I think that the decisions that I made along the way were how am I going to survive doing this.
But as a young person, I guess you always had this desire to make something.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a blessing because I'm never bored.
Yeah. And how old were you when you picked up a pencil and you realized, oh, hold on a sec, I think I'm a little better than my peers, and I think I could?
I was never better than my peers, actually. Okay. In fact, I always felt that my peers were better than me. But I nonetheless had an ongoing
Which
curiosity.
is no longer the case.
I don't know.
It's not.
Not for me to say, but I didn't have a formal art training until I entered university.
Okay.
I studied sciences prior to that, but when I entered university, virtually everybody around me who had more experience in art production than I felt was better than me. But because I knew that I really enjoyed creating,
yes,
I did not let that psych me out, and I think that's what is important for every artist, is to not look at how much better others are than you, because each person is different and has something different to offer, and I guess I had a confidence in that.
Now, that being said, I feel like although you have switched from science to art, but looking at your work and knowing your work, you haven't actually completely walked away from science. In fact, your approach is quite scientific. So what I would like to know is, in the era when you were surrounded by a lot of conceptual art, a lot of abstract art, what made you want to be a representational artist and still have that kind of a scientific side of you?
Well, there was a mix happening when I was a student. We're going way back to the late 70s and into the 80s. So there was, in the early 80s, I was in a whole trend of neo-expressionist artists. So there was a level of figuration there. But you're right in the sense that I was drawn more to a kind of figuration that tended towards realism, although that's not specifically the way to describe it, but it was recognizable subject matter. And I flourished because people were very patient with me, and virtually, most of my teachers were abstract artists.
Because if I'm not mistaken, you had Guido Molinari as one of your teachers. So that's exactly where what I'm curious about. How could you have someone like Molinari teaching you, a guy, for those of you who don't know, just look him up. You'll understand everything I'm talking about.
That's right.
To seeing your work, which is very detailed, very sensitive in terms of studies of values of light. I mean, this is just so beautiful what you've done this right here.
Thank you. Well, Guido was, he's passed away now, but he was a very intellectual man and extremely perceptive. So he had a certain level of politeness to him, and so he wasn't going to try to redirect me into the vision of what he felt he was interested in artistically. But he found what he could offer me was good advice in terms of controlling pictorial space.
Okay.
So starting out, knew that I enjoyed figuration, but I was quite clumsy when it came to controlling color and value relationships and contrasts. So he would perpetually tell me to make these subtle color adjustments and value adjustments and saturation adjustments in order to pull off the illusion that I wanted to create.
Okay.
So he would tell me, tone it down here,
Yes.
bring up the saturation here. And he got into the game that I was playing and was quite gracious about it.
Okay.
Wouldn't pull any punches if something was screwing up. I remember one day he walked into the studio, laughed at my painting, which was a picture of a person looking out the window, seen from behind. And he laughed and he said, "Bird head," and then he left. And so I was left trying to figure out what he meant by that, and I realized, oh, I didn't really put much of a neck there.
Yeah.
So if Guido says bird head, you pay attention. And so I realized from there that although my interest was not specifically how to be perfect with drawing figures anatomically, I realized that I had to do this convincingly.
Yes.
Because otherwise the narratives that I wished to depict would not seem credible. So
That's a good point.
so it's not, I work in a realistic manner, and I understand how to work with linear perspective. I understand to a certain degree human anatomy, but these are not end goals in themselves. They are jumping boards for me to be able to realize the narrative imagery that I want to accomplish in a convincing way.
Okay, so now the next question would be, there you are at school trying out all kinds of mediums. What made you narrow down your focus? Because you've done some paintings, but you're mainly known for your incredible charcoal pieces. And how did you discover charcoal? Was there someone who influenced you? And what made you pretty much grow your entire career as a charcoal artist?
It took time for me to realize the potential of charcoal. I remember the first time I ever touched charcoal was the day before my first drawing class. And I said to myself, I better try this a little bit so that I don't completely flop on my first day of classes. And it was willow charcoal that I was working with, and I remember being surprised at how it broke easily. And I did a horrible job, and I proceeded to do horribly in class. And but through time, I started to realize that one piece of willow charcoal, or the box that I had bought, was in fact a very varied experience depending on how I applied it. I could put it directly on the paper, I could rub it with my fingers, I could smudge it with a chamois cloth, I could erase it, and I grew to realize that one kind of charcoal was many different things. And it led gradually through my art school training, where I still was experimenting with all kinds of media. It was like a love affair that took years to develop. I realized that there are many different kinds of wood from which charcoal can be made. I started to make my own charcoal,
which is quite incredible. I remember there's a video available on Frank's website where he actually talks about making charcoal, and so if you guys are curious, we'll leave the link down below. You should definitely check it out.
Well, there's many different approaches. I use an easy approach, which is to stick it in tin cans and wrap it with tinfoil first, stick it in tin cans and deprive it of oxygen, which is important because when it heats up, you don't want it to turn into ash. You want it to carbonize without combusting. So I explored different materials, some of them found in nature, some of them wood that I bought in lumber supply places. And I grew to appreciate the personalities of all these different kinds of charcoal. Basswood goes on smooth and reliably. Vine charcoal, you can take great pleasure smudging it around, but it can betray you because there's little knots sometimes in the vine that can scratch your paper.
Yes.
Balsa wood, nobody works, as far as I know, with balsa wood charcoal, but I've tried it out and I loved it. As ephemeral and delicate as it is, you can blow this stuff off with not much effort. It allows you to describe very delicate things like feathers and very delicate nuances. It has a certain magical glitter to it. So, and
is that what excites you about charcoal when you're is that what made you kind of say, this is it, this is a medium that gives me the range of darks and that I want?
It's yes, of course, it feeds into my excitement. I think another major factor is the fact that it is relatively matte. So you're not at the mercy of lighting conditions,
Unlike graphite,
which with other media could shine.
Yes.
So relatively matte. So the kinds of rich velvety blacks that you can achieve are really a pleasure.
Yes.
And so everything from mysterious shadow to smoky atmospheres to carefully delineated subjects, depending on the tools, which are not just charcoal, but very importantly, in my case, erasers.
If I may interrupt, actually,
Yeah.
so it was back in 2004 or 5. I was a Frank student, and in one of the first classes, Frank was talking about erasers. And I mean, I've never met anyone as knowledgeable about the types of erasers that there are. So please tell us a little more.
Elaborate.
Yes.
Well, artists are aware of different eraser options generally. There's the polymer erasers that come in various sizes that you can quickly remove as well as draw with. Because erasers are not just to correct mistakes.
It's true.
Erasers can be a drawing tool as powerful as charcoal is. But there's a whole world beyond those box-like polymer erasers. There are various kinds of retractable erasers. I won't name the brands because I don't want to plug any brand in particular, but they come in all shapes and sizes, some of them narrow and long, some of them more pointy. And each eraser allows you to draw in a different way. You can also smudge the charcoal around in various ways. You can use chamois cloths. You can use brushes to gently move the charcoal around.
Yeah.
You can use electric erasers. You can take compressed air and delicately blow into applications of vine charcoal to put a little glow around something. So I think it's the case with any medium, regardless as to whether you're a visual artist or a musician or an actor, you start to appreciate nuance through the years. So it's not about the big special effects necessarily, although that can be part of it. It's about the subtleties.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that aspect.
And using this knowledge, this kind of a technical knowledge of the medium, what made you want to explore the themes that you work on? Which it's not all of it, but there's a lot of figurative, and there is a lot of architecture that can be seen in your compositions. So, what's your vision? What's your inspiration in your work? Is there one thing that you always wanted to achieve as an artist? Are you a storyteller? So, please elaborate.
It's a very good question, and of course one's objectives change trajectory through time artistically, because otherwise you would plateau and stagnate. But I can say that what has motivated me from the very beginning, without over-intellectualizing things, is a desire to make magic. And so what form that magic took has characterized my journey ever since. I don't go into a overly fantastical way of depicting subject matter. I greatly enjoy the work of others who do that, but I tend to stick more to subject matter which has a large degree of plausibility, but where something unusual and strange and a little magical is going on. And so, in fact, this has motivating me now more than ever, because I conceived of a story in which is not something that I'm sharing largely with people, but I conceived of a story that involves a magician. Because I realize that magic is an important part of what it is to create something that builds wonder and curiosity in others. So this story involves a magician character, and I produce a number of artworks, but I have not yet actually depicted the magician. I've just depicted events around this magician, and with a basic idea that this magician, like artists, is able to create alternate realities that involve illusion. But the difference between an artist and a magician, in my mind, although they could be both, but if you want to characterize what an artist is more, an artist is often someone who creates alternate realities like a magician, but who links these alternate realities with real life in a way that often addresses or gives insight into real life problems and problems with existence. And so artists are not working, generally speaking, entirely in an area of fantasy that is disconnected from real experience. And so my mission artistically is to provide some kind of solace or insight or comfort in a way, as this magician does in the story that I've created in my mind, in a way that somehow makes a positive contribution to this troubled world that we live in. And so that's what motivates me.
Frank, what I'm wondering about is, as a student, you've been shaping up this artistic voice, and just like a lot of artists, we really get into our world where we feel good, we create, but how were you able to make a living out of it? Because from what I know, you were able to get in the Galerie de Bellefeuille, which is, from what I heard, is the most selling art gallery in Canada, and I know you had some commercial success as an artist. So would you mind sharing some of your experience?
Well, that wasn't my first experience when I got out of school. And I just have to underline that first and foremost, what's important is that you have to be productive as an artist. Because if you're not productive, people aren't going to take you seriously. And so I'm not particularly interested in self-promotion, and I'm not, by no means am I gifted at that. But I was a hard worker, and I loved what I did, and people took notice.
There's just no way around otherwise, right?
People took notice. Now I had, when I was in school, I had an opportunity to be in some group exhibitions, and there was a certain audience that developed there, but by no means a wide audience. But I kept producing, and I kept interacting with those people who I had opportunities to exhibit with.
So you had a group of I'm sorry for interrupting you, but you had a group of artists with whom you would regularly exhibit, or with whom you shared common interest?
It was probably a group of about 6 or 7 artist people. When I got out of school, I moved into this ramshackle warehouse, which is not something that is, I think, done as much these days, but you could rent warehouse space for dirt cheap. And
it was incredible. You told me about it. Weren't you paying like $200, $250?
You don't want to know. Less. I remember I moved in with an art buddy of mine into an entire floor of a warehouse building. We each had about 1,700 square feet.
Oh my God.
And the rent was $300 a month, heat included.
Wow.
Which we then split.
I think today it would be.
You don't want to hear these stories. But in that context, and in these almost abandoned buildings, except for artists that were crazy enough to put their own plumbing in and live in these conditions, we developed a community. And so sometimes we made our own exhibitions, but there was a buzz, and so there were art agents that were in touch with some in that community, and they went to the exhibitions. And so I didn't approach the first art agent that took me on. This art agent saw my work in a group exhibition and asked if I was interested. So I said okay. There was nothing else I had going at the time, and from there, I feel that, well, I really this is going to be disappointing for young people who are wondering what the strategy is, because what I did is I did what I had to do as an artist. I produced and I explored and I made it happen. And then people came to me. So ultimately, being in one exhibition leads to another exhibition and other people seeing you. So I hate to break it to you, but I actually never went to a gallery to ask if they would be interested in representing me.
It was just hard work and showing and exposing.
It was just me producing artistically.
That's wonderful.
Now that might be a different age than it is now, but that's the way it worked for me.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But I think also what's important is to be genuine. As an artist, don't get caught up with aspirations of fame and putting yourself out there and going bananas on social media and pretending that you're being humble while you're really self-promoting. You know, people see through that. I think and that's, I'm not part of that experience, although I do use social media, but I'm by many people's standards not particularly active. Because that's not where my main interest is. My main interest is to make some magic as an artist. I know that it's not everybody's strategy, and some people would tell me that it's unwise, but
it's just not your interest, I guess.
It's not my interest. That's right.
And the way you chose to share your art with public is you published a book. There's a book available. For those of you who are wondering, I'll link the website below, but it's a very interesting book. In fact, I had an opportunity to work on it with Frank, but you felt that your way to put your artwork out there would be rather in the kind of a, just publishing a book and having it available in libraries, for instance, or for sale.
But the thing, yes, because I've had exhibition catalogs published. I've been reproduced in various publications. But I did always have a dream of making a big art book. And so I got together with the college I teach at, and together we published a book where I felt I was able to have full creative control. And to tell some interesting stories about how the art was made and what fed the conceptualization of these artworks, and it was a lot of fun.
Now, one thing I really admire about you, Frank, is that you always put your art before the commercial interest. So at some point, I know that you decided to do something that a lot of artists would be scared to do. You retrieved your work from art gallery. And you chose to rather, not to put time pressure onto producing your work, so that you could invest time, which is very admirable, because it's really hard to kind of convince yourself to do that as a kind of, just cut the ties with especially an art gallery like Bellefeuille, which is, very well known gallery with a great reputation. I'm also wondering how did you decide to switch this kind of a commercial model to teaching and painting and kind of exhibiting on your own pace?
It's a good question. I know that in life one makes compromises all the time, but my art is not a place where I want to compromise. So
that's a solid argument.
So we have to compromise on all levels, but not in the art production, not in how it's conceived. I remember looking way back to when I was dealing with an art agent in the 80s, and through this agent I was selling my work to corporations. And one corporation was involved in had many different subsidiaries, and one of those subsidiaries was in the food industry. And so we were discussing this commission, which was dealing with human figures and architectural settings. It's something that I enjoy. And my art agent was there in the studio, and the corporate representative was there. And so the corporate representative asked me if I would consider, on the table surface that was depicted in the painting, if I would consider putting a hamburger, because that one of the subsidiaries was what they were known for, was great hamburgers. So now I tactfully had to explain the difference between commercial art and fine art.
Yes.
Because commercial art...
Because you're not an illustrator, and you've never done illustrations.
That's right, although I share much in common with illustration and illustration techniques.
You teach illustrators.
That's right.
Yes.
However, commercial art is a service that you provide, so you are giving others what they expect, creatively of course, but fulfilling certain specifications. Contemporary fine art is a different ballgame. You are not serving someone else in that way. So I very respectfully explained that. I remember my art agent who was standing behind the corporate representative, was gesturing for me. No.
Of course, he just wanted to make his cut.
Just wanted to make the sale.
Of course.
But the sale went through nonetheless. I think there was a certain level of respect.
Honesty.
That was generated from me, not in a snobbish way, but just explaining carefully what I'm doing.
Because ultimately they want to buy a piece of art, otherwise they would hire a commercial illustrator to make an ad for them.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I'll be exhibiting I've always exhibited my work in group shows in various venues, and I'll be entering into another agreement with a gallery soon.
Okay.
It was not a philosophical choice so much as an intuition.
Yes.
That I needed that time to produce, to contemplate, to reflect, and to create in a way that I knew was genuine for me.
And what was your, other than the desire and the curiosity, was there some kind of a sense of, did you have a circle of other artists that you wanted to kind of, in a friendly way, compete with? Or what was the setting like, as you're entering this professional, kind of a professional world?
The setting was a setting of mutual respect and admiration. Each of the artists that were in my circle of friends and acquaintances, of course, had their own vision.
Yes.
Sometimes we shared technical tricks, if you will, that we've learned, but there was always the spirit of sharing. There was never, I was never in interaction with artists who hold their cards close to their chest out of fear that they would give away a trade secret, and then they would have someone competing with them in that way, because it's not technical tricks that are going to make you special as an artist. So that's why I'm very comfortable teaching, because I'm completely
There's only one Frank Mulvey.
Well, I except I have a twin brother, but that's another story.
Well, that's Carl Mulvey.
That's Carl Mulvey, that's right. But I'm always happy to share technical strategies, because I'm fully confident that there's no other Frank Mulvey. And so people may parallel me at times technically, but they're not going to compete with my vision. They have their vision. I'm not worried.
That's such a great advice for anybody who's watching this video or listening to this podcast. Being honest with yourself and just working hard. It's something that I've discovered the more I've learned about other artists, is that the ultimate solution to success, I think, is hard work. Just putting yourself in it. Absolutely. And without this fear of people stealing your artwork, to the point where I think if you're so scared of someone stealing your work, that's probably because you're not working hard enough, because it would be too easy to steal. Because I'm thinking about, some of the greatest masters, in art history, and as much as we try to learn, they're still the greatest, and I guess it's something that is great to learn from and apply in our own practice.
Absolutely. And again, I think this spirit of sharing is important, because there is an element of capitalism, obviously, if one aspires to be an artist that markets work for money.
Yes.
But as I think many of us know, there is a downfall to capitalism, which taken to an extreme becomes evil. Anything for profit. So first and foremost, I think you have to get that out of your head artistically, and dreams of fame and wealth and all that. Of course, a certain amount of money enables one to have a studio and to eat properly, and things that are important for artists. I don't believe in that myth that being a starving artist makes you a better artist. I think
for sure.
You should actually be well nourished.
Of course.
But be careful about falling into this this trap of dreaming about fame and fortune. Be a little poorer, but be happier.
Well put.
Yeah.
Together. So another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, Frank, is Frank not only as an artist, but Frank as a human being. You must have certain habits, certain things that you do that in a way affect your work, or you must have certain kind of rituals that maybe this is the time when you think about your next painting or drawing. So what would be the main thing that you would say that you love doing that helps you with?
Well, this might seem a little circuitous how I address that question,
Sure.
But I think first and foremost, it's important for artists to have balance in their lives, because you could entirely identify yourself as an artist and forget about the other facets of one's life, such as possibly having friends, being part of a family, eating properly, taking time to smell the roses, and so forth. If you entirely
disconnect,
well, if you entirely disconnect from these things and sort of take an extremist stance where your entire existence is wrapped up in your artistic life, if something goes wrong artistically, you crash.
Yeah.
So it's very important to have a well-rounded existence. Now, there are some young people that I know are very driven, and I regularly encounter them in my teaching. And some of those people who are very driven make the mistake of putting all their eggs in one basket. And so the usual product of that is exhaustion, possibly burnout, possibly depression. So keeping that balance is important. So what do I do? I've always enjoyed nature, so I walk over the mountain every morning when I go to the college, and often I return back the same way unless it's pouring rain. This actually is not only good for general health, but it's good to get out of a train of thinking where you could be forcing an idea and sitting there forever trying to intellectualize your way into interesting concepts. But
something like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, it's something like 6 kilometers each way, right? So
I don't know. I never,
12 kilometers per day going up the mountain to work.
Never measured it, but
that's why you're in a good shape.
Could be. It doesn't hurt, let's put it that way. But it's important, and people who understand how brainstorming works know that it's important to get yourself out of your routine periodically, because you can easily get stuck in a rut.
Do you have a tool that reminds you? I'm sorry for interrupting. Do you have a tool that reminds you of putting your work away? Because as artists, and especially we were talking about how hard you had to work to get noticed without necessarily having that as a goal. But you're a hardworking artist, and how do you know when to stop, when it's time to switch to something that's...
I must say I wasn't very good at making that kind of decision in my younger years, because I was very absorbed in my art production and rather neglectful of other aspects of my life. So I worked hard and I achieved various levels of success, but I've established a better balance through time, through experience and wisdom. And so ultimately, when you get yourself out of the mindset of being an artist, ironically, is when the ideas start coming. As simple as taking a walk, a surprising interplay of shadows, an unexpected movement, a juxtaposition of forms in space as you're passing buildings. These visual and auditory stimuli can greatly fuel your creativity as an artist. Now, I walk around with the camera, so I document these things, and I let them percolate. And then, given also some initial motivation to tell stories and explore, as I do, a theme of magic or curiosity and wonder, these things gel. I think it's very important also to look at the work of great artists. Great artists through time, across all media, across cultures, and enrich your understanding of what being an artist has meant through time. It's meant many different things and continues to mean many different things. But I can say that after doing so, pause and reflect. Don't immediately go producing artwork, because you're likely to imitate what you just absorbed.
Yeah, there's a fine line between imitating or copying someone and doing something of your own. Although we just mentioned before that even if you copy someone, there's still, there's just still one Frank Mulvey and there's still one Alex Kasyan. But at the same time, there are times when you catch an idea and you'll think about it. Either it could end up nowhere, or it could you could take further steps for it to become something. So what's your approach? How does Frank Mulvey make art?
I'll give you a very concrete example.
Thanks.
I was searching for inspiration one day, and I went into a costume house, which has since moved, but it was this glorious 3-story building in old Montreal with all manner of costumes, including pieces from a suit of armor. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I loved the feel of the metal, and I said to myself, this incredible juxtaposition between shiny metal and skin will be interesting. I did some work with people posing with this thing, and ideas started to generate. I knew that suits of armor connote other eras, medieval times. So I started to get interested in this idea of medieval times, stone work in architecture, various props. I asked myself, well, there's so much cliche imagery in relation to the medieval period. What would be some interesting terrain to explore? So I, at the same time, was working with a pregnant model. So it occurred to me that...
Was there a reason why you were particularly
Well, there again, it was pure instinct. I had a friend who was willing to model who was also pregnant, and I said, if I miss this opportunity, I'm going to kick myself. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with this yet, but I knew there was something very compelling about that. So pregnant model, medieval context, suit of armor. Well, what about a suit of armor for a pregnant woman? So when you start throwing ideas together like that, the artwork at a certain point carries you along with its own current of logic. So if there's these ingredients in play, at a certain point, I think it's important for the artist to surrender to the momentum of what is coming to life outside of them, in a sense. So I needed clarification on how I was going to deal with this. So I looked up parts of medieval architecture. And I discovered in the thesaurus that, in a dictionary, and then later led me to other associations in a thesaurus, that one part of medieval architecture and castle construction is what they say, how they say in French, la tour d'enceinte, which is the pregnant tower.
Which is the title of your...
Which became the title of the piece of the woman in pregnant armor, and was completely fitting of the whole context of architecture, period of time, and armor. And also the content of the drawing enriched from that, because why would a woman be wearing a suit of armor when she's pregnant? It would be to protect the unborn child, which is our future. So it became a drawing about protecting the progeny, protecting the future.
It's very cool how you take something that is completely unrelated, and as an artist you merge these elements together, and that speak to you and speak to your audience, and you produce a beautiful piece of art. It's really great.
Thank you.
Now, another thing that I would like to know is I teach, as you know, and it's teacher's responsibility to pass on these ideas, and in a way to think about. I have to thank you quite a bit for playing a huge role in my career. You've actually made me discover some of the art schools in the States, and thanks to you, I've took this step further. So, what would you say as a teacher? So, Frank Mulvey, as a teacher, is there something you're looking for in students? Is there something that you try to encourage students to do, or can you talk a little about your teaching?
Well, of course, it's an extremely layered experience to be with people who are coming from different backgrounds and have different fields of interest. But I think the common denominator is that each of these students is there because they have a spark of curiosity about the world and a desire to contribute with their artistic skill. Now, there's a whole range of challenges involved in that. There's technical challenges, which people who are less technically adept can quickly psych themselves out, which is a sad thing, especially when they're looking over the shoulders of others who may have more technical ability or more experience. But I will tell you for a fact, and I hope to encourage people with this, that what counts is not your technical ability at any given point, although one should strive to overcome technical challenges that are impediments to your wish to express, absolutely. But what's important is that spark of curiosity and a willingness to work
ethic,
because those who are very technically adept often could become a little overconfident and a little cocky and not apply themselves in the way that people who are less equipped technically. It's the people who apply themselves and who retain this wonderful childlike, if you will, enthusiasm about the world, who are those that make the mark in the artist community. It's not people who have technical ability initially. In fact, many of them sort of peter out. So technique is a means to an end, but it's not the end. What's vital is one's excitement, one's openness, one's willingness to experiment, take risks and fail. It's not about surfing on one possibly narrow set of skills that everyone's going to say, oh, that's amazing. But ultimately, it's not what's going to carry you through into happiness, into your old age as a creative person.
So I guess it's a desire, would you say it's a constant look for inspiration and desire to create, and hard work, of course?
It's a pleasure and love of life, really. and a love of the gifts that life has to offer. Now, that said, although everyone is creative to a degree and everyone comes up with ideas a mile a second, I mean, just falling asleep and dreaming is a great example of going through a set of experiences that your mind concocts. But what the difference is between artists who meet with artistic success, not financially but creatively, the difference between artists and people who are not artists is that artists are able to edit and strip away all the extraneous ideas that are like a constant noise in one's head every day of our lives, and get at the core of what's meaningful. Because you can come up with an idea a second, and you can just randomly keep producing artwork incredibly productively, but you're not necessarily addressing what is meaningful. So what's important is getting rid of all of that extraneous stuff and asking yourself, what is the core of what I want to say, and how am I choreographing every element of this artwork on all levels towards saying that meaningful thing. And so it's a sort of purifying of one's mishmash of ideas that actually makes an artist a successful artist.
Beautiful. I remember at the time, when you enter the school, there are so many things that are thrown at you, and sometimes you feel slightly disconnected. I mean, I remember doing my degree in illustration and walking in the class where everybody loved, drawing these cartoons, manga characters, and I almost felt like I don't belong here. What's going on? I like art from a different era. And I feel like there are a lot of people who can relate to that, where they feel like they're in this art school and things are not necessarily the way that we're imagining them to be. And I would like to know your feedback as a teacher, because you've taught so many people, Frank.
Well, it's a common sentiment, not just for artists, but for people in general, that we wish to belong. We don't want to be rejected from a group, but some artists may be perhaps less social or introverted, and so they don't tend to gravitate towards group situations. But it's almost a given that an artist who in a contemporary art context is trying to find their path and their personal expression is not going to be like other people. They're going to be distinct from other people. So there's often a sense of being an outsider in the hearts of people, especially in an art school and in artists in general. But I think that is not, don't let that discourage you from interacting and continuing to pursue your vision. Okay, it's a situation that you could embrace and gives you an opportunity to detach from the collective and see the collective from the outside, and then re-enter in with a new perspective. So in fact, I was thinking about this idea in a drawing that I produced recently called Outsider, and this drawing has a character seen in the distance. This is a lone character on a rooftop, and the character is doing an unusual thing, taking a shower from a water tower above. This is not something that is a conventional thing that people do in society. But that rooftop has sunlight, has meaningful words, has a distance from the hubbub of activity below that allows that character to reflect and come back into the world after that experience, in a sense more solid and more respectful of their own uniqueness. And so if I could offer the advice to young people, trust your own instincts in terms of your uniqueness. That difference is your strength. It's not something to fear. Embrace it, and it's what makes you special.
Such a good piece of advice. And Frank, as I'm looking at your artwork, it makes me think. It makes me think of cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that, other than let's say your conceptual approach, your optical approach to this particular painting was somehow inspired by old Hollywood film?
Well, I do have a weakness for black and white films, film noir genre. So it's an interesting point. And also, just as a director of photography will choreograph what is seen on camera, setting up foreground, middle ground, background, I do very much consider each prop not just as an excuse to seduce the viewer into the depth of that drawing, but also to contribute in those props, to contribute associations and meaning in that image.
I think this could be a great example, to share with younger artists, where inspiration sometimes can be found not only in other artworks. It could be in cinema. It could be just in life. It could be
absolutely
anywhere. And feeling like, the feel of an artist not belonging to a group. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe that's a perfect time to push yourself to explore further, in order to find your own voice.
And to find that balance between your place in the world and your internal world.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky balance, and we all find that balance differently.
All right, Frank, well, thank you very much for this wonderful interview. It was so great of you to have us over, share your work, share your thoughts. If you guys want to check out some more of Frank's work, go to his website, www.frankmulvey.com. If you enjoyed this video and want to see some more, hit the subscribe button, put a like, comment. We love hearing your guys' thoughts, and if you would like to share your experience, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Also, you can check out our website, www.creativemastermindshow.com. You can hear some other shows that we're doing with other artists. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and hope you enjoyed this episode. Bye.